Punk Revolution now. Today we're going to be talking about punk music, punk rock punk. Obviously my favorite genre ever, and you know, one thing I've noticed that a lot of people have told me, and it's something I've actually just noticed looking at Twitter and just seeing what people are posting as their favorite albums, their topsters as they say, is that a lot of people seem to not really actually like punk that much, which is fine. You know, I actually used to not really care that much about punk. Thinking back to like when I was in high school and I was getting into indie rock, experimental art rock and stuff like that, I was a really big fan of, for example, Radiohead, which would incorporate these like jazzy, complex chord progressions with some experimental electronic stuff coming in, and then some very emotional vocals about society and some like heavy topics. To go from that and then to listen to punk rock like Minor Threat or something, a lot of the times punk can just seem like a genre that's a bit more shallow. You know, like they're playing chords that are, maybe it's just like 3 chords repeated the entire song that are just power chords, nothing complicated about it. The vocalist is just yelling, you don't get very interesting melodies all the time. It just seems like some masculine anger, no emotional complexity of a lot of your favorite indie rock artists. So I do think a lot of people are just turned off from punk rock because it just doesn't click with them for one reason or the other, and that's fine. I'm someone who loves music of all genres, and punk is absolutely my favorite genre, so I want everybody who's a music nerd, which is I'm assuming a lot of my subscribers, to give punk a proper shot. There is actually a lot of musical, intellectual, emotional complexity within the genre of punk. It's my favorite genre for a reason, and I don't want sometimes the abrasiveness and the shallowness that sometimes is apparent in the genre, some people might perceive that, to turn people off. So this video, if you're someone who is a music nerd, who loves artsy indie music but don't like punk, I'm gonna recommend 10 albums that I think are gonna help you learn how to really appreciate punk, help you figure out how to get into the genre of punk. Not all 10 of these albums are necessarily punk rock. I think some of these are in genres that are like adjacent to punk rock. If you're someone who appreciates indie and experimental music, you should be able to appreciate these albums too. And from there, hopefully you can kind of see, oh, I actually, you know, like next time you listen to Dead Kennedys or Minor Threat or whoever, you can be like, oh, you know what? I'm able to grasp now more of the appeal of this because Punk Revolution Now gave me 10 albums that has some overlap. Think of this as maybe like stepping stone albums to help you get into punk. And these are also fantastic albums regardless, even if you don't ever have a chance of ever getting into punk rock. I think you should still listen to these. So let's buckle up. Let's start with number 1. The first album I chose on this list is The Velvet Underground's debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico. This is obviously a classic inspiration on so many genres, from punk to noise rock to dream pop to indie rock. Very melodic, very beautiful album at times, very noisy and chaotic at times. Some people might get upset, like, why are you putting The Velvet Underground? It's like hardly even punk. How am I gonna go from enjoying The Velvet Underground and Nico to now I'm listening to Minor Threat? What's the connection there? Well, first off, I mean, it is called proto-punk for a reason. You listen to the guitar work, for example, lots of the guitar work is just kind of noisy, crazy guitar solos where they're not hitting the notes rhythmically on time. It's like purposely sloppy, but it sounds super freaking badass. The amp is distorted and loud and noisy. The lyrics are super freaking nihilistic. Listen to the lyrics of Heroin, just looking around the world and hating everything and just hurting yourself with abusing drugs. I mean, lyrically, it's definitely punk. Musically, sometimes it's very melodic and beautiful, yes, which is great. I think everyone is gonna love that. And sometimes it's very 60s kind of, you know, psychedelic pop. And then there's times where it gets noisy and abrasive, and that noisy abrasiveness, I think you should be able to find the appeal of, even if you don't like punk, because then you can see, oh yes, it's very badass when we let a guitar just rip a ton of noise, and then from there you can understand that punk is basically taking that rip a ton of noise and make it an entire freaking genre. And if you like the Velvet Underground and Nico, I definitely recommend you check out their second album, White Light, White Heat, which has Sister Ray as the last song on the album, which I think is the closest thing the Velvet Underground ever did to just straight up punk rock. That is a freaking insane, beautiful, amazing song, one of my favorite songs of all time. And if you can grasp that song, Sister Ray, you are well on track to understanding how absolutely insanely epic punk is as a genre of music. The next album on my list is Suicide's debut album, Suicide, which is what a lot of people will consider synth punk. Some people will call it no wave, so you can think of it as synthy, sort of post-punky, dark, abrasive music that, well, I mean, they don't have guitars, it's synths. And I think that actually is a great stepping stone for someone to help you get into punk rock because, well, punk, like I said, is oftentimes very abrasive. Suicide, you actually still do get some really fantastic melodies. The synths, even though they're very cold and dark and creepy, they're still like really, really catchy and quite melodic, and then same with the vocal melodies. Even though the vocalist sounds like he's insane, about to freaking snap, he's singing some really catchy melodies. So it's a fantastic middle ground. You get that catchiness, you're gonna have a lot of fun listening to it, but you're also gonna pick up on that dark, evil, creepy, scary, angry, nihilistic, fudged up lyrics of punk. There's a reason people are calling this synth punk. The synth chord progressions, you can definitely picture someone just like playing that on a guitar, but instead they're using some kind of, like I said, some dark, creepy synths. So it's a fantastic album. It's also a great album to help you understand the no-wave, kind of New York, late 70s, early 80s punk no-wave scene as well. So definitely check it out. It's freaking awesome. The next album on my list is, of course, Slint's Spiderland. I do claim this as a punk album, but, it's really hard to put your finger on it because it's doing a lot of stuff. Is it post-hardcore? Is it post-rock? Is it experimental art rock, progressive, ding-dong, whatever the heck you want to call it? And the fact that it came out in 1991, it's really a hard album to pin down, but I will say this. Before I liked punk rock, I certainly sure as heck enjoyed post-rock. Post-rock is definitely a music genre that's going to appeal to a lot of music nerds because post-rock is epic AF. This album is a really, really sweet middle ground between post-hardcore and post-rock. I feel like post-hardcore and post-rock go together like peanut butter and jelly, so if you're someone who doesn't like punk, but you appreciate musical experimentation, you appreciate post-rock, you appreciate indie rock, I mean, this is truly one of the greatest albums of all time, so you absolutely should listen to it anyways, and if you don't like it, keep listening to it until you finally fudging appreciate how epic it is, because it's one of the best albums of all time. And then once you appreciate it, you can be like, okay, now I understand the appeal of post-hardcore, which is a subgenre of punk. Maybe I can explore more post-hardcore / post-rock albums, and then boom, before you know it, you're a punk rock expert. So definitely check this album out, even if you are not interested in punk. Obviously, it's an essential classic album, and if you already like it, maybe try listening to it and thinking more about how the punk influences come in here with the power chord guitar, the guitar work they're doing, and the maybe listen to the bands that inspired Slint and were inspired by Slint to see where Slint kind of falls within the family tree of punk. The next album I'm going to recommend is X's album Los Angeles. This right here is probably the most straight up just punk record I've actually included on my list so far. It is just punk. It's punk rock. It is some of the just most fun punk rock you will ever hear. Awesome, awesome melodies, really weird vocalists. It's a lot of fun. Like, I know lots of people who don't like punk, but really like X and really like this album and like X's later albums as well. Listen to this album, soak in the fun, weird, strange, kind of dancey, weirdo songwriting structure. It's a weird album. It's actually fantastic. They're blending together just this weird quirkiness in their vocals with super catchy melodies. Some really interesting, sometimes kind of like pop, kind of like power poppy kind of songwriting, but also lots of weird songwriting experimentation in there as well. I mean, it's freaking awesome, and like I said, it is straight up punk rock, so if you can grasp this album and enjoy it, which I think you really should because it's freaking epic, you're halfway there. You already really like a punk rock album, and you're well on your way to grasping the genre of punk as a whole. The next album I want to recommend to you is Jesus Lizard's album Goat. This is really one of my favorite albums of all time. It's just, whew, you got the freaking epic, heavy, just bass lines that are just so powerful, and the drums just, and the guitar work is like literally the best thing you've ever heard. That noise rock bluesy, just like so just dissonant and loud and aggressive, and the vocalist, It's a really fun album. I think it's also, like, if you want to get into noise rock, I would definitely recommend it as an entry point into noise rock. A lot of people might say punk revolution now, that's not punk, it's noise rock. Well, noise rock and punk are basically the same thing, so shush the fudge up. Definitely listen to this album. I think if you can appreciate the abrasiveness in this album, which I think is very doable, even especially if you're someone who doesn't really normally like abrasive music, I think the abrasiveness here is just so chaotic and so fun and so, like, there's just this mania and insanity just seeping through these albums songs that it's just you're gonna be like, I want to rip off all my clothes and light myself on fire and just go hop in a grocery store. And is that what other people think when they listen to this album? Well, go listen to it. It's gonna help you get into punk, I think. The next album I want to recommend to you is really fantastic. It's a short, sweet, just delicious post-hardcore record, which is Team Dresch. How do you pronounce that? Team Dresch? Team Dresch's Personal Best. It's called Personal Best. Holy crap, this album packs a punch. There's so many things I love about it. First off, it's just got this, like, LGBTQ angst just raging through the album. Very political album. So if you're someone who maybe doesn't like punk music, but you're someone who shares this kind of, left-wing angst from a maybe a lesbian perspective, and that sounds appealing to you, you're gonna like this album no matter what, just because the lyrics are so freaking awesome, so political, and so powerfully, just the delivery is just so authentic. And I also really like the way this album is produced. It's like produced very much like an indie rock album with just fantastic guitar tones. So again, if you're someone who doesn't really normally like punk's abrasiveness, this album, if you're someone who likes maybe like Modest Mouse and stuff, I mean, this doesn't sound like that, but you like the indie lo-fi kind of feel. This has a very lo-fi indie feel to it with fantastic guitar tones. You bring that together with the LGBTQ riot girl queercore lyrics, and you've got an album that I think is gonna really appeal to a lot of people, even if punk is usually not your jam. And then from here, once you click with this album, you're gonna be like, okay, I see now, punk is badass, I gotta go check out more punk. Next up on the list, we have a hardcore punk classic record you definitely need to listen to, even if you have no interest in punk whatsoever. You need to listen to it just because it's a classic and because it's so influential and it's just such an important piece of art, which is Bad Brains' debut album, their self-titled album. This album just completely fudging rips. They are playing so fast, with so much energy, so much mania. The guitar shredding is literally just shredding the entire time. The vocalist is so freaking chaotic, just losing his freaking mind over the music. Impossible for you to listen to this and not have fun. But there's also another really important kind of element to it, which is they're using some really interesting guitar tones here, kind of weird, kind of psychedelic, and actually even like reverby reggae at times. This album will have straight up dub and reggae songs like in the middle of their hardcore record. And I know hardcore, if you're new to the genre, it can be exhausting. So having some like reggae songs kind of breaking up the album actually can be really useful to help you kind of catch your breath before they go into their next epic, amazing shredding or whatever. So on top of just being straight up one of the best punk records ever, I actually think it has a lot of ingredients that makes it perfect for someone who maybe doesn't normally like punk to help them get into punk. And I mean, they're an all-black band from DC, one of the first hardcore punk bands to ever do it. Just such a awesome band. Please check this album out. If you thought Bad Brains was epic and weird, I have another epic weird punk band for you. Minutemen, double nickels on the dime. Just like the Bad Brains album, this is a classic, extremely influential, just one of the greatest punk rock albums of all time, and that alone makes it worth listening to. But the reason why I'm putting it on this particular list is because I know for a fact this album is so experimental, so weird, so just artistic. If you're someone who appreciates art, you hate punk, you hate the abrasiveness of it, but you love art, you're gonna love this album because you can just feel these are artists who are just getting together, jamming, expressing whatever creative and political thoughts coming to their head, and just writing a really catchy riff and all coming together. And it's very post-punky in the way of how artistic it is. But ultimately what it comes together is one of the best punk records of all time, one of the, I think, really the foundational post-hardcore records. It has a lot of quirkiness and weirdness to it that I think kind of has a little bit of like a Captain Beefheart influence in it. I actually think Minutemen have explicitly said that they're influenced by Captain Beefheart. You will absolutely get and feel and the appeal of the punk rock ethos is absolutely going to click with you. Just very humble, but also very revolutionary, artistic, but with like no pretentiousness whatsoever. Just letting these three dudes get together and jam and just let their heart fart. And it also has the iconic song Corona, which is the Jackass theme song. You know that one. You'll hear it. It's a dope album. We finally have made it to the last album on the list. Thank you so much to everybody who's watched to this point. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate when people watch my videos because I put a lot of thought and effort into them. And if you could please like, comment, subscribe, it's also appreciated, but that's another story. All right, so last album is going to be Leatherface's album Mush. This is, I think, just such like a phenomenal, just perfect punk record. It is just straight up punk rock. Really does not get more punk rock than this. If you can learn to love and appreciate this album, then you have really clicked with the genre of punk, because I think in terms of the accessibility and like kind of all these albums are kind of like on the border of punk and then maybe art rock or something like this. Leatherface's album Mush is just like all the way into the punk category, but I think everyone needs to listen to it. And if you don't like punk, it's going to be a huge stepping stone for you to understand how awesome punk is, because this album fucking rips. It fucking rips. It's very melodic, and I think melodies are very important for helping people get into punk, because I think one of the reasons people don't like punk is because a lot of times it lacks melodic focus. This album has a very strong focus on melodies with a really weird, quirky, but I think amazing vocalist, and a band that is absolutely shredding some really, really strange, weird chord progressions that you might have never heard before. Sometimes they're doing weird time signatures and stuff. Even though it is straight up punk, there are just like a lot of quirky, weird, and like just interesting talent coming through this album. So you combine the sheer instrumental talent and the sort of unique approach to punk that they take with the melodic, putting the melodies at the forefront with a fantastic vocalist. I think this is an album that a lot of people who don't like punk are going to be able to click with. And like I said, if it does click with you, you're in. You understand punk rock, because this album is like full-blown punk rock. Probably the least accessible on this list, but still, I think, if you really want to just digest like a truly punk record, you have a good shot of this album being that one. I think anyone who likes Leatherface's album Mush is a true punk rocker. So think of that as the final exam of the list. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I just want to say again, like, these are freaking fantastic albums all around. You should just listen to them if there's any albums on this list you haven't listened to, go listen to it. Go listen to it. And maybe try, just kind of let these albums sit and re-listen to them until you can finally understand the appeal of them. And then boom, now you're going to open the door to the genre of punk rock. It's my favorite genre. It's an incredible genre with a lot of different subgenres that are all incredible in their own different ways. I really want people to get into punk rock because it's just like a whole amazing universe of amazing music. And I want you to have that joy that I have of exploring hardcore, New York hardcore, power violence, emo core, post-hardcore, metalcore, all these genres. And more, way more. That's the gift. Hopefully this list will help you. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Please like, comment, subscribe. Punk Revolution now.